Hello, this video is a review of a one-page diagram which explains why Americans are getting sicker, why healthcare is getting more and more expensive, and why the healthcare system is treating more chronic disease, and why premiums individually and as an organization are becoming more and more expensive and increasing every year. It's really unsustainable. For those of you that want kind of a 1-minute overview of this diagram that I'll kind of break down a little bit more comprehensively, but within a few minutes, here it is. What we are eating and what we're drinking is producing chemical reactions and changes in our bodies that lead to an increase in expedited fat accumulation, insulin resistance, kind of vascular changes that lead to an increase in blood pressure and dementia, and it leads to changes in our bodies that make us insensitive to chemicals that normally produce a sense that we're satiated, we've had enough. So those changes are going on by what we are eating. That's leading to more and more diabetes, more and more strokes and cardiovascular incidents, more and more medications and admittance to hospitals and ERs and dementia. That's expensive and it's unsustainable, and there are some easy action steps that we're going to propose at the end of this video that can, if embraced, even 50% of it can produce significant changes to the individual and to the healthcare system. So for those of you that want a little bit more of an explanation, here it goes. What we eat, and I'll describe that, produces a chemical called uric acid. It is a kind of an evolutionary survival tool that when we were hunter-gatherers helped us survive times of dehydration, times when we weren't uncertain when we were going to get the next meal, but today is a dysfunctional relic of the past. It's an outdated signaling pathway that is leading to chronic disease, and it works like this. I'm going to break this diagram up into the upper left quadrant, the upper right quadrant, the lower left, and I'll explain what it does to our bodies, and then I'll talk about a few statistics, but what we can do as organizations and individuals to turn this around. So where do we get this uric acid that's producing these negative effects? Well, the things we eat, the organ meats, the livers, sardines, these contain purines, and these purines are converted to uric acid. That's the byproduct. That term you're going to hear over and over, and there's going to be a theme here. Alcohol, especially beer, has brewer's yeast, which produces purines, and that's introduced into the beer. Sugar, especially fructose in prepackaged foods, is really the focus, which was introduced in the 1970s. That gets converted to uric acid, and when fruit juice through juices and sodas is introduced to the body, it's a huge bolus of sugar that really our body is incapable of effectively managing. Again, that's broken down to uric acid. Processed carbs are quickly converted because they have a lack of fiber, processed down to uric acid. And then we make uric acid in our bodies in an endogenous manner. So that's where uric acid is derived from in terms of the foods we eat. What's the issue? Well, the upper right corner here, excess uric acid leads to what's called metabolic syndrome. And there are 5 subcategories that make up that. And an increase in blood pressure is one of them. Insulin resistance is another one. But 88% of Americans have one or more of these sub-elements. So that's a vast swath of America that is getting affected by this. The rise in uric acid in blood samples over the years directly matches the introduction of fructose in processed foods in the 1970s. 66% of packaged foods have fructose to sweeten the product, make it more enticing, and it leads to increase in sales. So for the employee, it's more expensive, out-of-pocket ER visits, medications, monitors, trips to the urgent care. 15% of Americans make up 80% of the healthcare spend because those are the folks that are having ER visits. They're going to the hospital. They're having strokes and cardiac events that need to be treated as a result of this chronic disease. Chronic disease in retirement is expensive. So what we do now has significant financial implications decades from now. And then for the employer, there's a productivity issue. There's the fact that our grain workforce is becoming more chronically ill over time, and we're having to pay for that in terms of the ecosystem, our workforce, but also because of premiums, and it's unsustainable for employers. And some key statistics: uric acid levels above 7 is associated with a 33% increase risk for stroke, 155% increase in all forms of dementia, an 85% increase in vascular dementia, and that's what my dad suffered. So these set of facts connect with a story that's personal for me, and I think a lot of people can relate to some aspect of what I'm going to describe, either in themselves or a family member. So these set of facts become personalized very quickly. And also at 55% increase in Alzheimer's disease. So how does this uric acid actually impact our bodies? Well, in 4 areas. Uric acid produces more fat accumulation, and it affects our mitochondria, our cell batteries, our lithium batteries that each cell, especially the brain, has. It creates insulin resistance. It creates a vascular effect, a negative vascular effect, and it plays off the impact of salt. So let me go down the first row here, fat and mitochondrial. Our mitochondria, our cell batteries, become less effective. And people with dysfunction in this particular cell battery organ often complain of feeling tired and fatigued. So, food for thought, it might be partially due to a decrease in volume or function of your mitochondria. Uric acid signals to the body we need to increase energy storage. It increases fat storage. And this is the same mechanisms that bears use as they prepare for hibernation in autumn. It harkens back to our hunter-gatherer days when we were uncertain of food and our next meal. So it was the body's protective way of addressing the issue. But this signaling pattern is dysfunctional because we have plenty of food, we have plenty of hydration these days, but it still affects our bodies. Enzymes inside our cell batteries, our mitochondria, are deactivated. So this reduces our ability to burn fat. And again, it's the body's way of preserving energy through fat storage and keeping the body from being able to burn it. The formation of new mitochondria, new batteries, is diminished in order to, again, conserve fat and energy, but this is extremely bad for your brain. So there's a physician who wrote this book, Metabolical, who had a really interesting quote. He said, sick mitochondria is chronic disease, and chronic disease is sick mitochondria. So the second impact is insulin resistance. Uric acid reduces the function of a chemical called nitric oxide. Nitric oxide assists the insulin's ability to move out of the artery. Nitric oxide also facilitates the movement of glucose into the cells. So uric acid eventually leads to insulin resistance. There's a vascular effect. So uric acid interferes with nitric oxide production in vessels, and vessels become less flexible. And again, back in our hunter-gatherers days, this was the body's way of making sure that we had enough blood pressure to reach the brain. So it constricted the blood vessels, so blood pressure went up, and we could have blood go to the brain and perfuse the brain. But we have enough ability to have hydration. This is an outdated signaling pathway once again. Vessels become constricted and blood flow slows to our organs and our brain. Transportation of blood and nutrients becomes compromised. This can lead to an increase in blood pressure and the need for an additional medication, blood pressure medication. Vascular dementia is really a reduction in blood flow and nutrients as a result of partially to uric acid. And that's what my dad suffered. And again, I go back to why this is personally interesting to me. And again, I think most people can have some story that helps them relate to why this is important to them personally and to their family. And then let's talk about salt. Salt increases the conversion of glucose to fructose. Fructose is then converted to uric acid, and the cycle begins all over again. One of the things we learn is, trainers and nutritionists and physicians say you need to stay hydrated. Well, our cells need a certain amount of hydration, but one of the things hydration does is to reduce the impact, the negative impact of salt, which again expedites the conversion of blood glucose to fructose and interferes with that negative cycle. So what are the things we can do that are relatively easy to do? Well, we can have a relationship with a primary care physician, and a lot of employees don't. They have insurance, but they don't even know who their primary doctor is. Employees often are seen in the ER for conditions that are really primary care conditions. So that's an expensive location to treat a condition that could have been prevented or easily treated in the primary care environment. Food and hydration, what we eat and drink, most of it, or a lot of times, it's processed, charged and infused with sugar, fructose, that enters our body quickly and affects and creates this cycle, is changeable. We can modify the proportion of this processed food. Dinner and lunch and meals take a little bit longer to prepare, but the return on investment is significant. And we can have proper hydration for the reasons I described. So visit your doctor, do the yearly well man and well woman visits, and monitor those markers that would indicate you have some preliminary form of chronic disease, prediabetes. But even prediabetes is 5 to 10 years down the line. So monitor your health, choose the food and drink wisely. And a lot of times people who have metabolic syndrome have depression. It's associated. A lot of times people eat out of depression. So it's healthy to be able to contact a mental health professional, kind of address those concerns that are maybe driving things that are concerning you. And lastly, movement and exercise. Americans need to move more. They need to get their bodies outside, and they need to exercise. Exercise increases an enzyme in your cell batteries, your mitochondria, called AMP kinase, and that really reverses all the stuff I've been talking about. So if you want to just quickly have an anecdote for what's going on, exercise and do it consistently. Zone 2 aerobic exercise, what is that? That's getting on an exercise bike or do a hike where, for 4 minutes you got your beats per minute up to 120, in my case, beats per minute. And then I go down to steady state and I go back up to 120 beats per minute and back down. I'll do that for 20 or 30 minutes. That increases the mitochondria in our cells and especially our brain, which addresses a lot of the issues that cause us fatigue, that are perpetuating the cycle, and that lead to dementia. And lastly, I went to the store the other day and I have a sample, an ingredient sample of Simply Orange, and it has 24 grams of sugar, 2 tablespoons, in a tiny 8-ounce sample. So you take a look at that and the foods that we eat in breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and that constant bombardment of carbs and sugar and subsequently uric acid into our body, and you wonder why Americans have so much chronic disease, and you wonder what we can do that's low-hanging fruit to be able to adjust that as an individual or as an organization. Hopefully this diagram gives you a sense that what the condition is, what's driving it, and what can be done in terms of instruction, education, outreach to address the issue.